Yes, I am aware that my voice sounds like crap. Thanks for noticing. But after a while, you can't keep putting off making new content, so I hope you'll forgive the sound and focus on the message. I'm doing my best. Today, I look at what is a common problem among religious apologists going emotional because they've got nothing rational to say. This isn't just a problem with religion, but it is a problem that happens quite often among the religious. So let's check out this short example to see what I mean.
Hey, this is Grant Brissett talking about winning the person, not the argument. Well, Christian apologetics is about making a defense for the Christian faith and answering challenges to the Christian faith. But we're not here to win arguments. I mean, it gets kind of distracting sometimes because we study more the academic side of Christianity, theology, philosophy, and different arguments. And so we can get into the arguments, but the point is, I don't really care about the arguments. I care about people. I care about sharing the good news.
Well, that's a lot of word salad. So what you're really saying is that you can't actually win the arguments. You've got no evidence. You've got no intellect. You have nothing rational to say. So instead of trying to answer legitimate questions that people have about your religious beliefs, you're just going to go emotional, try to appeal to anything but someone's brain, because you've got nothing worthwhile to say there. Does that sum that up for you?
Now, in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman Geisler and Dr. Turek, they talk about people rejecting Christianity for three main reasons. Those three reasons are intellectual, emotional, and volitional. Some people just don't want to accept Christianity.
Well, you can count me in the intellectual camp. I reject Christianity because it doesn't have any objective support for it. Now, let me make a prediction here that he's going to try to push the majority of atheists into the third camp and pretend that most atheists don't want to be Christians. Or at the very least, he's going to try to make them emotional, not intellectual. It seems to me to be the most common stance among apologists, and certainly my experience when it comes to Christians making claims about the non-religious. But I guess we'll see.
And Frank Turek has a brilliant question to bring out people's motivation. You can ask somebody, if you found out Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
And I've answered that many times. But the question has a serious flaw that I've also explained. It requires that you become part of their team and worship their God if you found out that said God was real. And the answer is no. I wouldn't worship their God, even if I knew their God was real, because worship requires that I find the character of said God to be worthwhile and valid, two things I simply do not find with the Christian God. I would believe God existed if I found sufficient evidence to support it, but because I find the Christian God reprehensible and a moral monster, there's no way I would ever become, or more properly, ever re-become a Christian, regardless of the consequences.
And if they say no, well, then their problem or their stumbling block isn't intellectual, even though you might be having an intellectual discussion about a point.
Which is not the case, as I've just explained. And of course, Christians are terrified of people who reject their claims for intellectual reasons. They're desperate to get as many people out of that camp as they can for any reason that they can, so they can claim people are just being emotional or just don't want to worship their imaginary friend.
So this person might talk about the cruel God of the Old Testament, but when you ask them if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And they say no, well, there's something either emotional, maybe they were mistreated, maybe they were perceived to be mistreated, maybe they don't like Christianity, maybe they have a false caricature of what Christians are and what they should be.
Or maybe, as I've said, the Christian God is a moral monster in the Bible, and hence, even if I believed that the Christian God was real, there's no way I'd bow down to this complete asshole that you follow. Now, you can rationalize your way around the simple fact all you want, but the reality remains that there's a difference between acceptance and worship. I know it, you know it, Frank Turek knows it. I mean, I know Frank Turek exists. He's a complete douche, but I know he's real. But I sure don't bow down and worship him, do I?
So the main reason I'm bringing this up is that when we're talking to someone about a different issue, there can be an intellectual stumbling block or block in the road, or there can be an emotional.
And you'd much rather deal with the emotional one because you've got no answers when it comes to the intellectual questions.
So the classic example is the problem of evil.
Which, as I said before, is an intellectual question that you have no real answers for.
If I'm talking about the problem of evil, I might talk about, God created the potential for evil by giving us free will to accept or reject him, right? And I can talk about the problem of evil being the cause of humanity leaving God. Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden.
Neither of which makes sense based on the assigned characteristics that you've arbitrarily given to your imaginary friend. Because according to those characteristics, there can be no evil in the world. Because if there is, your God, as you've described and defined him, simply cannot exist. And that's not something you can handle.
But if they have an emotional problem, something that maybe they were mistreated by someone in the church, then that's not really where the discussion should go. So we need to win the person, not the argument. Well, this has been Grant Brissett talking about winning the person and not the argument. Thanks.
No, because you've totally failed miserably to handle the actual question being posed to you. You instead want to pretend that there's something else at play, and therefore you can just ignore the question and try a different tactic. And this is something I see from the religious all the time, where they just dodge the actual issue and pretend that they can address something else entirely. It's wholly dishonest, but what can you expect from the absurdly irrational? They don't understand why this is a problem, and let's be honest, they just don't care. Because at the end of the day, they aren't here to answer questions honestly. They're here to indoctrinate, to get people to believe as they believe in any way possible, honestly or rationally or not. Typically not, which is why you see this tactic so commonly among the religious. It's really all they've got. And that, as we all know, is just sad.